county recorder's email hit my phone at 2:41 a.m., a timestamp that still sits in my chest like a shard of glass. It said a quitclaim deed had been filed on our house, transferring ownership with my signature attached. I was in bed when that signature supposedly happened, one arm cramping around the shell of a white noise machine, the other pressing a pillow against the window because the street lamp on North High was running too bright again. I moved through the house in the glow of my phone, the way you move in a room you know too well, but is suddenly unfamiliar. The email had PDF attachments. I opened them and saw my name culling in blue digital ink, a swoop of the J the way I sign receipts at the grocery line. The notary stamp was a name I didn't recognize, the seal slightly askew, like it had been pressed by a hand in a hurry. 2 hours earlier, I had watched the solitary ring doorbell clip of the night, a person in a yellow raincoat walking past our teal-painted porch at 11:58 p.m., face turned away, shoulders hunched against a drizzle I never heard. The clip was short and oddly framed, as if the motion zone had been dragged to the edge of the door. I remembered the earlier weekend when I'd found the Ring app's motion settings changed wide to narrow, zone sliced like someone pruning a hedge in the dark. At the time I chalked it up to a software update. At 2:41 a.m., I stopped believing in glitches. The backstory is soft compared to the edges of now, but it matters. I live in Clintonville, Columbus, in a narrow 2-story with a steep staircase that groans on the 4th riser. We bought it in the spring of 2020, scraped down the wallpaper, painted the banister the colour of an old piano. I run a small e-commerce shop from the attic, refurbished mid-century light fixtures, Edison bulbs, mounted under skylight that leaks when the snow melts too fast. On wheat as I do maintenance at the nearby apartment building on Indianola, which means I spend a lot of time at Lowe's, walking the aisles for anchors and cork and pretending I don't see the couples whispering about grout colours like the right choice is a lottery number. My wife, Eve, works nights as a respiratory therapist at the OSU Wexner Medical Center. Night shifts gave her stories she never shared at tired infants, alarms, the kind of courage that only exists when you're out of daylight. Night shifts also carved a strange groove into our marriage, hours where I didn't know where she was and had to act like that not knowing was a form of faith. We have a 4-year-old, Matilda, who chirps like a sparrow at dawn and calls the Olentangy River the Long Puddle. Matilda's speech therapist at Nationwide Children's is kind and wears cardigans with tiny embroidered strawberries, and that office is where about half our money goes. The other half goes to the mortgage at Huntington, to the vanishing sump pump fund after the August flood, to the unexpected dentist visit when Matilda swallowed a tiny rubber dinosaur head and we worried it was a crown. There were red flags before the email. I catalogue them now the way I used to count screws on a switch plate. Careful, consistent, pretending order existed if you assemble things right. The first was the cinnamon in the car, a thick sweet smell lingering at 6 in the morning even though your shifts were supposed to end at 7. Cinnamon like a latte from Fox in the Snow on Thurman, a place he would never drive to Afton overnight, at least not for herself. Then there were the miles on the Civic, a number that crept up by 8s and 12s on nights when the hospital is 3 miles away and the trip is usually a straight, predictable 6 there, 6 back. My phone's Google Maps timeline showed gaps, grey bands that were once a neat path of blue arrows, and she told me the timeline was inaccurate, that it had been turning itself off. Life 360 showed the same, the circle label flipping to location permissions paused while she texted me a photo of a ventilator screen, numbers blinking like a slot machine. Cash kept vanishing from the envelope in the junk drawer. We had an agreement. The envelope was for the farmer's market and unexpected school projects and the pizza tips when the kid upstairs at the rental building called at midnight because a pipe mum like a ghost. The envelope got light sometimes, and when I mentioned it, Eve told me I was tracking nickels when I should be tracking moments. I swallowed this like medicine because she's good at sounding right when I'm tired. The first time I investigated, I did it badly. I looked through the glove box and found a white 12x plate slip with a charged pass for the Green Lawn Avenue exit, dated at times when she should have been moving between floors at the hospital or sleeping. I stared at the slip until the numbers blurred and told myself she had given a lift to a co-worker or missed a turn. I saw a receipt from a storage facility on Fisher Road with the unit number, B117, written aslant. I told myself it was for seasonal decorations, even though I have carried every box of Christmas lights up and down the basement stairs and know our inventory like I know the weight of a ceiling fan in my palms. I told myself the storage facility paperwork was something she handled because I handle everything else. I told myself a lot until the telling itself started to feel like another lie I was holding. When I asked about the mileage or the cinnamon or the toll slip, she would sigh and say hospital life is messy, and I am making it messer. She would tilt her head and let tiredness spread like a stain, and then I would feel small, and then I would feel ashamed for feeling small. Gaslighting sounds like a loaded word, but in my life it was softer, something like fog that made the neighborhood stop signs feel far away even when I was close to them. The county email was not soft. I called Huntington Bank when their branch lobby opened, my voice shaking as I explained I had received notice of a quitclaim deed. The woman on the phone asked if I had initiated a home equity line recently. My chest went cold. I said I had not. She asked if I had authorized a notary with that last name I still can't spell without checking the PDF. I said I had not. She told me I should come in, and I did. And that is how I found myself sitting in a chair with coffee that smelled like burnt toast, staring at a copy tray where my signature in blue digital ink smiled back at me like a friend who knows a secret. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital and asked to see HR. The hospital lobby's floor is a glossy stone that shows every scuff, every footprint. I watched my own shoes leave dark half moons as I walked. It was a public scene by design because I wanted witnesses. The HR woman with a laminated badge named Kim, or maybe Kayla, sat in a glass-walled room beside a potted plant that had been cut back to its spring shape. She pulled up schedules on a monitor angled so I could see the columns of dates and shift codes. I told her I was there to confirm whether my wife had worked overnight, last night or the one before, because I had concerns about a forged property transaction and I needed clarity. She said she couldn't share specifics for privacy reasons but could confirm whether the dates aligned with employment records if I provided them. I handed her a paper I had printed: midnight toll charge, ring doorbell clip time, county email time, an Apple Wallet Walgreens activity at 12:22 a.m. on Lane Avenue. She stared, tapped, stared, ran a finger under her necklace. Then she looked at me and said something like the records do not align with overnight shift assignments. In other words, no. Even as I write this, I feel the same hot, embarrassed anger at how my chest went hollow and how I protected her in that moment, how I told HR she was probably helping a friend who got called for an unexpected pickup on a different floor. The HR woman let me keep my story. But she also asked whether I wanted the Employee Assistance Program number for counselling, which I took like a bandage I had no intention of using. I just walked past the glass with the coffee cup, and I realized she could read my face and the paper in my hand, and that I was now a man having a problem in the fishbowl. At a hospital where everyone understood heart rhythms, and mine was failing. The first reveal felt definitive. No shift when she said she had a shift. I drove home aching and righteous, and within an hour it had become something I was prepared to reframe if she could give me a story about late cuz or swapped assignments. The second reveal arrived when I checked the mail and found a bill addressed to a P.O. box I didn't know existed. A credit card and Eve's name from a bank we never used, a second account number tucked into the corner with 8 star digits and a list of charges to a baby boutique in the short north and a pharmacy across from that. The card had been issued months ago. The charges were spaced like breadcrumbs on nights she claimed extra hours. My stomach flipped. Matilda's last pediatric appointment had included a bracelet printed with her blood type. I remember how the nurse handed it to me because I keep things like that in a shoebox in the hall closet, a personal museum of our child's small history. I have O negative, Eve has AB positive, and the pediatric bracelet printed a combination that made me pause in the kitchen that night with the last of the dishwater dripping down my wrist. There is a mathematical way blood types mix, and ours do not do what the bracelet says they did. I googled with shaking fingers and felt dizzy at how quickly basic biology could make a person feel like furniture in his own life. I pushed that thought away because it was too big to hold, but it lingered, an echo that returned whenever the house was quiet enough. I called the county recorder's office and reported a suspected forgery. The woman on the line was measured and calm. She gave me a case number and told me to bring ID and any notarized versions of my signature I could find. I printed a dozen old documents and placed them in a manila folder. I also walked to our mailbox and pulled out my own pen, the cheap retractable kind with a rubber grip, and signed my name 10 times in a row, noticing how I never make the same loop twice. I placed those 10 in the folder too, because I needed to feel like I still existed in ink somewhere. I froze the credit card we shared, called the bank to ask about fraudulent accounts, and opened a separate checking at a credit union on North Broadway at 2:12 in the afternoon, when the sun slants onto the teller's nails and makes them look like tiny neon signs. The woman at the desk asked if there was a reason for the new account, and I said something about a budget reset, which sounded like a phrase people who don't want to say what's really happening use. I moved a portion of my pay there and set up a new rent deposit for our tenant upstairs. It felt like trying to build a life, but while staying polite about splendors. When I confronted Eve the first night, I did it without raising my voice, because Matilda was asleep and because I still believed that if we kept the volume low, the facts would soften. I laid out the county email, the HR confirmation, the toll slip, and the card statement with the baby boutique. She said I was connecting unconnected things and that she had been paying for a co-worker's medications because the co-worker's insurance was a mess. She told me the quitclaim was a way of correcting an error with the title from when we were financed, and the notary had done it online, which was why it looked off. She said the HR woman didn't know everything about schedule swaps and I was embarrassing myself by asking. She told me to stop being suspicious and to trust her because we were a team and I was not acting like a partner. She said many things to fill the air, and most of them were sentences she could have used in any argument because they sounded reasonable in isolation. When I asked her about the box, she said it was for a birthday surprise I had ruined. It is astonishing how long a person can live in the space between doubt and decision. The next twist arrived courtesy of our neighbour, Cassandra, who runs a daycare out of her living room across the street. She is practical and sees everything without trying. She texted me on a Tuesday morning to ask whether we had been travelling at midnight because she had found a soft-sided cooler on her porch with our name sharpied on the top. Inside were syringes and a cold pack and a folded paper with dosage instructions. Cassandra told me she did not want to be involved in something she didn't understand. Her text was a clean witness statement in fewer than 30 words. I told her thank you and that I appreciated her letting me know. I placed the cooler on the counter and stared at it like a small bomb. I drove to the storage unit on Fisher Road that afternoon, the one with the slip and the unit number. The man behind the counter wore a cap with the facility's logo stitched above the brim and told me he wasn't supposed to give access to anyone not on the lease. I told him I wasn't asking for access, I was asking whether the name on B117 matched my wife's. I slid across a copy of the toll slip and the credit card statement like I was present a case in a TV show, which made me hate myself a little. He eventually said he couldn't confirm names, but that sometimes families used units together. Then he told me the building had internal cameras and that no one would see the footage without a formal request. I left embarrassed, angry, scared. At home, I looked again at the car's odometer logs I keep on a little notebook and the cup holder numbers I jot down out of habit when I fill up the tank because I like tracking fuel economy. The pattern made a map, increases on nights tied to shifts, 1 drop for a car wash because the seats were damp the next morning, then a spike the morning after the email and the yellow raincoat. The pattern pointed toward the storage unit at the edge of town, toward a pharmacy, toward a strip of townhomes near Grandview Yard with identical stoops. I stared at the pattern until Matilda tugged my sleeve and asked for pretzels and apples with the seriousness of a surgeon, and I put down the notebook amid snacks that smelled like relief. The public confrontation happened at Sunday dinner at Eve's parents' place in Worthington, because her mother insists on roast and green beans and a crusted casserole that fractures like glass. I brought the manila folder and placed it next to the casserole pan, and I hated myself for the staging, but I needed witnesses who would force both of us to keep our hands still. I said I had concerns about documents filed in the night, about a credit account I didn't know, about storage and medicine, and an HR record that didn't match stories I had been told. I laid the papers out in a knee-dark and traced timelines in ink. My father asked whether I had considered the stress of shift work and the harassment of being doubted at home. Her mother said this was a family matter that should not be displayed on a table with serving spoons. Eve stared at the papers and said I was humiliating her. Her sister, who is a teacher and has a steady teacher voice no matter the room, asked whether a lawyer had been consulted and whether the notary's commission number matched a real person. I said I had called and been given a case number. I said I had frozen cards. I said I had moved money to protect the mortgage and the roof. I said I had a letter drafted to request a paternity test because a pediatric bracelet had given me a question I couldn't shake. I said I was not accusing anyone of anything I couldn't prove. I was asking for help with what I could not understand. The room stilled. The casserole reflected the ceiling light. Eve said a test was unnecessary, and she said it with a tight calm that sounded like the hallway outside an operating room. Her sister suggested that if there was nothing to hide, then clarity would be a kindness. Her father said families should not be run with threats, and I said boundaries aren't threats. He did not like that. I did not either, but it was the only sentence that felt like mine. The next reveal was the easiest to quantify. I checked the Franklin County Notary lookup online and found that the commission number on our deed belonged to a woman whose name did match the stamp, but the commission had expired the month before the deed was filed. I took screenshots and printed them. I filed a complaint and attached the PDF of my signature, the one I could not remember making. The clerk at the desk where I filed wore a cardigan with a pearlescent button missing near the hem and told me, in a tone that contained no judgment and no comfort, that these cases can take time. She handed me a pamphlet about real estate fraud and a phone number I saved as record a fraud line, which made my contacts list look like a police blotter. Another twist arrived in the form of a text from a number I did not recognize. The message said something like, "Our arrangement cannot continue with this level of attention." I felt my scalp tighten. I asked who this was, and the response came as a photo of our hall I recognized as the interior of storage building B, a corridor painted beige, numbers in black, a scuff at knee height where people drag boxes, the door to B117 slightly ajar. The person texted that leaving valuables in a place with cameras was unwise and that my wife had been clear about discretion. I took a screenshot, then I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the table, because sometimes that is the only way to reclaim a minute. I told the police non-emergency line that I suspected identity fraud, property fraud, and possibly blackmail. The officer who called back gave me an incident report number and told me to keep a log of contacts and changes in accounts. He said to consider placing a freeze on our credit files, and I did. After fighting through the Equifax website, which is designed like a game while losing is the most common outcome. I placed a lock on Matilda's credit too because a friend once told me kids are targets. Their clean slates are like blank checks to people who turn families into spreadsheets. I set up fraud alerts that dinged my phone every few minutes, which made me feel safe and paranoid at once. I printed a letter requesting a paternity test, simple and adorned, and left it on the dining table with a pen. I wrote that I love my child and needed clarity because the biology was confusing me and eating me alive. I wrote that the test would not change how I treated a 4-year-old who calls the river a long puddle and tucks stuffed animals under her chin. I wrote that I was asking because I could not continue building a family on beings I did not trust. I ended the letter with my signature, the one that looked like mine because it is, not the blue swirl of someone who copy-pasted me into a night I did not live. I also called a lawyer whose billboard along him in a 71 is too much gold and a smile that feels like a dare. She listened and said we should initiate a legal separation to protect assets until the deeds could be untangled, and that asking for temporary custody arrangements was reasonable and sometimes a kindness when people needed space to say what they do not want to say. She filed papers. I have the case number. It sits on my desk next to a thin plant in a clay pot and a stack of screws that no longer match any light fixture I sell. I should say clearly that I did not want divorce. I wanted a version of us that moved to Clintonville with a baby asleep in a carrier and hung the first string of lights in a yard that smelled like new mulch. But wanting is not the same as being, and the accumulation of night-blooming facts grows heavy. During this period, I felt sick all the time, a steady nausea that I told my doctor was like seasickness while standing still. He ran tests and said my blood pressure was too high, that he wanted to watch it, that sometimes stress makes the future feel shorter. He suggested better sleep. I smiled in a way polite people smile when you hand them an instruction that ignores the architecture of their house. I went back to the storage facility with the police incident number written on an index card. I asked to speak with the manager and was told one would return at 3. I sat in the parking lot and watched sparrows dive into a gap in the roof where the soffit had cracked, watched them disappear and reappear like clauses in a sentence. When the manager arrived, I showed the incident number and asked whether I could stand in the corridor and take photographs of the door. She said she could not grant it without court paperwork. She also said there had been a burst pipe near B117 a week before and the units would be open for inspection tomorrow. It felt like a plot twist in a bad movie, but it was real. I stared at the cement. I went home and made dinner for my child and for my wife, who ate standing up like a person in a perpetual hurry. The next day, I returned and watched as a maintenance worker propped B117 open. Inside were 2 plastic bins, a collapsed playpen, and a cardboard banker's box labelled document Smith and Dave marker. Our last name is not Smith. The maintenance worker closed the door when he realized I was watching. I did not push. I am not brave or reckless. I am both too much and not enough at once. I went home instead and changed the Wi-Fi password and disabled Eve's access to the Ring account with shaking hands. Then I added a second camera face toward the street, hidden behind a potted fern I bought impulsively at Oakland Nursery, because control comes in leafy forms sometimes. The public scene repeated itself in smaller, sadder iterations at the daycare pickup when Cassandra asked whether everything was okay and I said we were sorting some paperwork, at the grocery when a neighbour said she had seen a person in a yellow coat leaving a manila envelope on our steps at midnight and asked whether she should call the police if it happened again. The independent witness I didn't expect was Dan, the maintenance supervisor at the apartment building where I work. He showed me the entry logs for the building next door, where a unit had been accessed late at night by a fob registered to a vendor's name that sounded generic, the kind of LLC you choose in a rush. The car in the camera frame looked like our Civic. He placed his hand on the printout and said he didn't want to be involved, but he believed I should see this. He had no reason to lie to me, and it made something in my throat knot. At a certain point, the narrative of betrayal is so dense that every text and every beat feels like a stone tossed at your skull. But it was the pediatrician who forced the question I kept dodging. We had a routine follow-up for Matilda's speech progress, and the nurse asked if we had ever done a confirmatory blood type test because the bracelet from the urgent care visit had been printed based on a parent's verbal comment. I realized in that moment that my night terrors had been built on a piece of plastic that might have been rum. It didn't fix anything. It did shift the force slightly. I told the nurse we would do the test. I did not tell anyone else yet because I wanted to hold one possible truth on my own for 24 hours and watch whether it built or collapsed. In those hours, I thought about choices. About whether I should insist on the test before more legal steps. About whether clarity would be a blessing or the cruelest gift. Would you demand the test now, with the rest of the house in splinters, or would you wait to keep one thing unbroken for a child who loves the long puddle and a white cat figurine she carries everywhere? I wrote a list of boundaries that I taped inside a cabinet where I keep spare rolls of painter's tape. They read like a manual for a life that needed reassembly. Freeze join cards. Do not sign anything new without a lawyer's eyes. Collect written confirmation from the hospital for shift times when possible. Keep the incident number on a card in your wallet. Change the passwords again. Set up a new PO box in your own name for legal correspondence. Schedule counseling, even if it feels performative, because outside eyes are sometimes the only ones that see the wall you're backing into. I added last, breathe, in a handwriting that slanted too hard. When Eve saw the letter about the paternity test on the table, she did not speak for an entire evening. She moved through the house as if reality could be willed back into place if sound did not occur. Matilda sang to her cat figurine in the corner and mispronounced her word we love. I stood at the sink and washed a plate in circles until the water went cool. Later, in bed, Eve lay on the edge, and I lay on mine, and the space between felt like a third person who would not leave. I do not know what prayers sound like when the person you used to say them with is the one you now pray about. The notary board sent a letter 3 weeks later saying the commission on the deed was invalid on the date filed and that they were forwarding the matter to the recorder's office for further action. I took the letter to the bank, where a man in a blue tie and a woman with a clipboard sat with me in a small room and used the phrase potential cloud on title. They could not unwind the deed that day, but they could place a note on the account and assure me no equity line would be opened without in-person verification. They also recommended filing a police report specifically for the forgery, and I handed them the incident number like a student turning in homework. Eve's sister checked in to ask whether we had sought mediation. She said families can survive strange chapters when money and stress collide. She asked whether anyone could have pressured Eve to act in ways that made no sense otherwise. She asked whether her father's debt, which none of us spoke about but all of us knew, could have become a weight he had placed on his daughter's shoulders without admitting it. I stared at her text and tried to stitch new compassion onto my frayed patience. It is possible my wife tried to solve multiple problems, badly, and chose secrecy because she thought mercy looks like carrying rocks alone. It is possible she also used that secrecy as a tunnel for things that had nothing to do with mercy. Both can be true. Both are brutal. The pediatric blood test returned normal and compatible with heart types. I stood in the bathroom with the paper and did not cry, which surprised me. I felt relief and anger braided so tightly that they made a new rope. It didn't fix the other facts, the deed, the secret card, the storage unit, the yellow coat, the night schedules that evaporated under lights. It did change the shape of the cliff I was standing near. I told Eve the result and watched her shoulders drop in a way that told me she had been carrying a fear too, quietly, without telling me about the noises it made at night. The absence of that fear didn't create trust. It built a small platform where I could stand without hearing water below. We entered mediation because the lawyer said judges like to see people try. The mediator was a woman with grey hair that cowed like punctuation and the patience of someone who collects stamps. She asked us to list what we wanted to protect. I said the house and my business and a routine for Matilda that honoured her therapy schedule and her morning songs. Eve said her job and her license and her right to make mistakes without being followed by cameras at noon. We drafted a temporary custody plan and a spending list and a no new debt clause. We wrote the words no new liens on property and initialed them. We left the office holding an agreement like a newborn, fragile and weirdly beautiful in its clarity. I still do not know why the yellow wrinkled figure left a manila envelope that night. The envelope contained a single receipt for a donation made in my wife's name to a fund at the hospital that covers patient transportation. The amount was too large for a casual gift, not large enough to buy virtue. There are stories I could tell to fit that receipt: a desperate family, a favour called in, a decision made in the fluorescent wash of 3 a.m. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe it also covered tracks I will never see. I keep the receipt in the manila folder. It sits between the notary letter and the HR printout like a riddle. I have not filed for divorce. I have not said we are staying married. We exist in an armed truce where the weapons are calendars and passwords and the way we say goodnight. I sleep with my phone face down and the ring notifications set to silent because I cannot live with the thrill of small lights at the edges of my vision. I told Eve that the storage unit had to go. She closed it and brought home the bins, which contained nothing damning and nothing comforting: old blankets, a playpen from a stage we are leaving, a box of documents belonging to someone named Smith that she said she had stored for a co-worker as a favour when someone was moving in a hurry. I asked whether that co-worker ever returned for them. She said yes, and that I did not meet them because I was at work. I nodded. I wrote down the name Smith in my log like I was a detective in a paperback who solves small crimes and never gets promoted. The aftermath is a daily practice. We exchange Matilda's preschool pickup with the precision of trains. We sit in the same room and watch our child stack blocks, and when our fingers touch passing a cup, we both flinch like we touched a stovetop. The legal case about the deed moves slowly. The incident report sits there, polite and inert. The separate bank account keeps me from feeling naked. The Wi-Fi password is a string of nonsense I memorized because I'm too proud to write it down where she could see. I see the yellow cut sometimes in my head when I pass a rack of rain gear at REI. The ring cam clip is 31 seconds long and I can recite the moment the shutter crosses the left side of the frame. The porch still holds the echo of that for the way forwards hold the memory of heavy bookcases long after you move them. I stand there in the evening sometimes, after Matilda is asleep and the neighbourhood is a soft chorus of TVs and raccoons, and I count the cracks in the paint near the mailbox. The teal colour we chose is starting to fade at the edges chalky. I think about painting it again, a fresh coat that makes the house look like a place without secrets. I do not yet know whether that is honest or foolish. The morning after the county email, birds hopped along the wire that runs across our street, lifting and landing like dots in a cartoon. I stood beneath them with my phone held up, filming nothing, pretending I was capturing the shape of my life as it changed. There's one question I have not answered and maybe never will. If you were me, would you swallow all of this and pledge to rebuild brick by cautious brick, or would you honour the version of yourself who refuses to live in a house where the walls move on their own at night? Both choices feel like betrayals of different loves. Both carry costs I pay daily in small coins. Sometimes I fall asleep on the couch and wake to the glow of the Ring app dancing against the ceiling like a small fever. I keep the 241A and email in a folder I could delete with 2 taps and do not. I keep the case numbers on a post-it under the router. I changed the front porch light to a daylight bulb because the warm ones made everything in the video look like a dream. Now it is harsher, and maybe that is better. I want the facts in white light, even when they make me squint. I bought a laminated county map at a thrift store and hung it in the attic above my workbench. Clintonville and Worthington and Grandview Yard are small squares and lines. I trace the routes I know with a finger. North Broadway to High, High to Goodale. The way the streets cut like a script I have learned to read and can no longer recite without thinking of the nights between. The map looks old, like it remembers when deliveries were letters and not electronic mail at 2:41 a.m. I keep it there as a reminder that land does not change when we lie on it. Only we do. Tonight the porch is quiet. The teal paint glows a little under the new bulb. On the power line, a dark bird holds and blinks and then flies, its shape smudging the edge of the frame before it is gone. I stand at the door and listen for footsteps I know by heart and ones I never want to hear again. The house breathes. I count to 31 for the seconds in the clip, and then I go inside.